Hello and a very warm welcome to our Sympathy Lab, which is the first edition right now here for our EDM expert talk. So to explain a little more what we are talking about, a Sympathy Lab is what we founded and look for a collaboration platform, a hub, a library to ensure that all the information that really make the change walk the talk or generate shoulder-to-shoulder approaches within the industry find their space to be published. We start with the EDM expert talks with EDM, the Outdoor Industry Compass, to make sure that the right persons with the right, let's call it expertise, but also inspirational force find their way together. Today, we think the first session we have here goes live with Status Quo for Sustainable Business. I have the honor to talk about collaboration, cooperation, to start with the why. Where is status quo in, let's call it, consumers and also outdoor sporting goods and consuming perspectives together, and what does that lead to in terms of circular economy? I'm really honored to present Maximilian Reimers. We have a really strong attitude for activist campaigning, and you work not only, but you work mainly for Fridays for Future. Very warm welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Markus Huppach, you are not only a strategic activist, yes, a strategic executive for the sporting good industry, but also you are known for moving away from traditional concepts in your leadership. Rüdiger Fox, you are a given activist within the textile industry and the CEO of Sympatex. So in this round, to make really sure that for the next 45 minutes, we have open eyes, ears, and mindset from our listeners, I would love to ask you to say some words to yourself. Why are you here for? What is your personal attitude? And what makes you tick together with the group we are here for now? Max, would you like to start?
Yeah, of course. So, as you've said, I'm Maximilian. I'm from Northern Germany. I'm pretty happy to be here. I'm 22, started with being into politics 5 years ago and started striking for the climate with Fridays for Future 2.5 years ago. And there I'm kind of responsible with some other people and many other people for collaborations, for strategy of the movement. And what brought me here is the strong belief that if we want to have change, we need to form alliances, because changing our culture of consumption is good, but changing the way of production, the way of also production cycles is the real, and pressuring politics to change the rules so that good businesses, for example, or good systems of producing are much more favorable than they are now. And that's why I'm very interested to be here, because we are coming from very different backgrounds.
Different worlds, exactly. And I really ask you not to comment. The discussion will come later. Right now, just some words on yourself.
I won't. So first and foremost, thank you very much for the invitation. I feel really honored to be here. For those who know me really well, they know that I love nature and I love movement, and that in combination makes sport. And that is what I'm known for. And I'm very lucky that I could spend my whole professional life so far in the sports industry. The last 20 years with a Japanese sport brand called ASICS in different roles, and then lately on the retail side with Sport 2000, a retail service organization. What drives me personally actually is the desire for lifelong learning, for change, for transformation. And I strongly believe that is only possible with a growth mindset. And I would like to add here that people, teamwork, and collaboration is something super important to me. And that needs to be built on the foundation of meaningful values. So that in a nutshell actually describes me as a person. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion we will have now.
Me too. Rüdiger.
So we're not allowed to comment yet,
nope.
Right? Okay. So, yeah, my name is Rüdiger. I'm actually I hesitate to say after 5 years, but I still feel like a newcomer to this industry. with all the ups and downs in the process of falling in love with outdoor nature sports in a way. But on the other side, shocked, surprised, what credit we took from, I dare to say, future generations, having 4 kids, but what credit we actually took as industry. Unconsciously before, but now consciously because we haven't changed. So my quest is still the kind of evolution between the antithesis of activism versus the status quo, but how we can actually merge these two into a movement rather than consuming our energy in the fight. And on the other side, you mentioned values, and I'm coming a bit from the value side, but I completely stopped talking about values when I talk about transformation and change, because I realize if the system doesn't recognize values, what can it be actually the twist parameters that we change of our behavior? So I think the common part is the research in who can find the right button to change. So I'm curious.
Yeah.
So the entire topic is not only consumer, but consumer as a starting of a why, if it comes to kind of where can we start also informing ourselves, sharing knowledge and spreading the knowledge. So if we see this kind of circle, what we all talk about, if we see where does a process start or not end and where will the complete closure will be, I would love to ask you, because seeing the fact that everybody of you had a tipping moment, a turning point for not only for sustainability, but also for attitude, mindset, etc. Given the fact that this is done, because we only have 45 minutes, seeing an ideal situation that we all have we have different generations here, we have different working perspectives, and we have different scale of activism. All high, but different scale. So maybe we can share and start the discussion with all of you having a slight, what's in your head if it comes to consumers, sustainability / circularity. Just a short round, and afterwards we will start discussing.
So I would start.
Yes, please.
Because my thesis would be, well, to choose what you want to consume is like a very privileged choice, right? You need to have the monetary background to choose between a vegan lifestyle and a lifestyle eating meat. You have to have the monetary background to like choose whether or not you take your car, whether or not you take the public transportation, or whether or not you take the plane. So I would say the main thing about consumption that, or the main leverage is the right word, I think, to change consumption in the future is not only to like find a new way of culture with your environment, because obviously with this whole individualistic world we live in, people define themselves over their consumption choices a lot, but to change them in the way and the way we need to do in a fast way is not to go to people and say, well, you need to stop this, but to stop the production. To stop the production of bad things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a call towards the sporting good industry, outdoor industry, etc. Marcus, you can already answer.
It's an interesting point. I would like to add one perspective, and the first perspective for me is the own mindset to it. So you need to have the right mindset in order to change something. That is a starting point for me. And yes, Rüdiger, to your point, probably being so long in the industry, I am guilty too, because for too long we have just oiled the engine and we moved on and on and on and on. Fair point. But there was an iPod moment for me where I personally changed my mindset as well, and where I realized, oh my God, it is late, very late. Mm-hmm. So I have to change first myself and believe in it. That's the starting point. And as a leader, maybe, as an inspiring person, you need to believe, you need to be passionate, and then you can actually get people on board joining you to change and transform certain things. And what we discussed beforehand in the prep call, I mean, for me, there are two things. One is the pressure point coming from above, meaning changing the way of production, changing the way of supply chain, logistics, all of these. And the other point is coming from the bottom, from the consumer, because there is pressure which a consumer can put in place and what I personally can do to change. So I don't need to finger point first and say, hey, you better do this, but what is it I can do personally? And that does not make me to a better person, right? But it is a mindset. It is it's like the way you look at certain things.
I didn't mean to. Sorry if I
Go for it.
Like,
You are fully allowed. Fully allowed in all your energy.
I'm not saying like. So when I say choosing between your consumption style, let's put it that way, is very privileged because you need to have like the monetary situation to do it. It's a huge thing if privileged people come to that understanding that their way of behaving also influences the way other people live, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a huge thing. But my counter thesis would be, maybe not counter thesis, but additional thesis would be that we have the situation of rules and laws being like made for the fossil fuel industry and for the fast living, just throwing away industry. And I think we need to change those rules to have a chance to be as quick enough as we need to be to change the climate and us, right?
And I agree to that. Sorry, reading
I'll let
one
you
more
go
time.
and I as much time.
And I agree to that. Nevertheless, I would come back to that point because I can be an incubator in my friends, in group of friends, right? And we spin that circle wider and wider and wider, and will not really move the needle in a big way, but it starts bubbling somewhere, right? And you come from the bottom. And I think, I strongly believe in that as well. That is somehow in a way like influencer becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. And maybe we come to that point later, but I see it myself with me personally. And I can be the role model for others as well. Nevertheless, again, with the industry, I agree.
Let's keep it to the complete circle, because the perspective you will bring in, I pretty know quite well, because that spans then to how much democracy, how much laws, where do all that political experience you have right now, being an activist campaigner for Fridays for Future. Mm-hmm. So we need to listen. And I know that you will add and transform.
I'd like to add a few
thoughts.
ideas, and I don't think it's the one right or wrong. One is, I think, if you look at the ancient philosophy of dialectism, it was always that somebody had an idea, somebody put the counter thesis, but actually where the solution came was in between. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to look this on a historic part. I'm super happy that finally a generation goes on the street. I had this when I was young. Ever since, it was pretty boring. So finally, there's a voice. And taking a voice means there's a disconnect between what is and what should be. Still, I believe we need to then look at what is the fastest way a system can change. And I'm an honest believer in the power of the economic system if we set it up right. I think the fundamental disconnect we have between the ecological movement and the economic movement is not about the system, even though many people believe the system is bad. I think the system is fantastic. It's just our input factors are wrong, so the output is shit. And I think that's what we need to understand. What are actually the input parameters we need? And we were with you guys on the street to fight for a high level of CO2 taxation. It's still far too low. But the moment in an economic system when you put taxation as a cost factor, and you could do, in theory, the same for all other ecological factors, you convert the direction of the system instantly. It's much faster than to stop it and reinvent it.
Yeah, of course.
What?
Of course.
Still a few hours of counter-arguments. Third, we need to look at what is decision-making. And if I look at the consumer now, I very much simplify and I haven't thought through if that's complete, but there are at least three factors we need to consider. One is what's the motivation. So what drives, like you say, what is my ethical constitution? What do you want, or just do I want to show off? I mean, we educated everybody that fashion makes the person, you know. So how to change that? Secondly, we need to understand what is actually the level of knowledge. So what is the transparency we have given So somebody can take a conscious decision, and the conscious decision is right. And thirdly, it's probably then the act, how people can act. And I have the theory, you might be right on a few things, but I think the beauty in sustainability is it's fundamentally not a topic of money. Because if I eat vegan instead of meat, it's cheaper. If I don't fly, it's cheaper. If I reduce my consumption on fast fashion, it's cheaper. There's at least a range of topics where it's not valid, and I see your point, it's sometimes valid. So we need to question, well, why isn't it working here?
I know that you wanted to say something, but you had something after the beginning when it was around CO2 compensation and the system, how to change the economic thinking, and then afterwards.
Okay, no.
Because I think we're in such a crisis that we need to move as quick as possible. So we will have systemic things that will need to change, like our whole energy production is a systemic thing that needs to change, right? We can't have huge coal plants anymore. The better thing is to have like decentralized renewable energy, like powering up your own village, your own town. Maybe everybody kind of owns their own energy, which is planted on the roof. But what you've said about like the price for CO2, that's very important. That it's that is there. That CO2 and like putting waste into our atmosphere has a price, and still our systems aren't there that people, for example, from a village, from a small town, needing to drive with a car to work, are able to purchase a new car, able to take the train because it's not there. So I think we have to think, of course, in the given systemic possibilities, but also invent new ways of living together. For example, with circular economy in the what is it called, the clothes industry, but also, for example, with new energy production, with new mobility concepts, and so on. So obviously, we need to work with the system that's there, and there are solutions that are helping, but to make it socially available and to take really the majority of the society with us, it's really important to have also other tools in hand.
You brought it perfectly to the point, because you don't know those guys, but you can be sure that both of them have not only the system in place where they can use old systems because they were there to, like it always was if you work 30 years in the industry, but also a mindset to start rethinking what can we use, what is there and not too bad, but also accelerating. So I saw you having a lot of energy to comment.
No, I just wanted to add a part. Personally, I always feel we are going ourselves in circle and we live in our bubble, right?
Yes.
And I often, that's my personal approach to certain topics. I try to take another hat on. And with regards to the comment you made on education, I strongly believe when moving out of our bubble, there is a huge bunch of people without any knowledge about what we are talking about here, circularity.
So why? Just continue.
So why?
Why?
That's a good question. So is it the role of the industry to educate them? Is it the role of the school nowadays to educate them? Is it their own role to, I mean, you mentioned once, search the internet for an hour and you know everything.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know many people who do
You
that.
can find shit also, right?
Say it again?
You can find like rubbish also.
Yeah, judge.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And you're right. I said it in preparation of this talk. I said, take a freaking 1 hour and focused on figuring out what the industry is doing. You know everything. It didn't take me longer. Nobody told me.
Of course, but what you need to comment. It's your role.
Well, I think those are
We take
all-
you hostage for the new generation.
I think that's
We are out.
You said like at least two things that are very important to see. First of all, talking about the industry, I think there's a responsibility also, if you want to create new markets, you should inform people why they should consume other products and be aware of other production conditions, right? Second of all, the industry didn't quite did their job the last decades. If you look at the fossil fuel companies, that's not outdoor and sports companies, but fossil fuel companies literally spend billions and billions of dollars just misinforming the public, the politicians, and so on about the climate crisis. So I think industry has a responsibility to now inform the public about what is possible with new production conditions and, for example, circular economy and so on. And second of all, of course, the state also has to, because it failed absolutely. Like the only way we learned about climate crisis was like a huge faceless monster. Like there's the climate crisis, everybody goes to like waste and we can't live anymore on this planet in like 50 years. And everybody was like, well, but we're doing something against it, right? And everybody was like, yeah, no, but now let's go to the next topic. It's reproduction. So that's the thing you've learned about in biology, maybe in geography, but that's it. So I think you're absolutely right. It's very important that industry and the state now takes the role.
One thing, and I have to say that as a disclaimer here, you're right with industry. Nevertheless, we can't look at it black and white. We do know that there are some very, very great role models out there already, so brands who are at the forefront of all of this, and they do a fantastic job. Are they loud enough? Maybe not, probably not. Do they have
fantastic enough?
Maybe not, but there are brands out there. Can they do better? Probably, but they started, and they have something in place, and they progress with that. And I'm a big fan of trying to support them and highlight those things, the positive examples, rather than talking only bad about everything that is there, right? Because then there is no space for those brands to grow and to shine. And I think that is also fair that we highlight this in this discussion here.
Yeah, definitely.
Come on.
Just a second, please. Because the story why you are here is having these controversial conversations and trying to keep a thing of a red thread somehow. It's important, exactly what you were commenting on. You say your perspective as a consumer, but also being somehow able to raise a voice, not only for yourself, but for whatever butterfly effect will come. You comment on this out of the eyes of an industry expert, being in the industry, having both perspectives, trying to make things right or better than they were. And ideally, you have, before you have the activist position you wanted to comment on, just a reference on what the original question was, where are the consumers right now? He was telling us where he sees it. You were commenting on exactly that way, so that would be great if you answered that one before we go into the other way.
I have to say, normally I don't ask myself the question.
I know.
Because I think responsibility cannot start with a consumer question. We have miseducated on purpose the entire community as if fashion is the absolute life-changing fundamental part of everything we do. And to convert this will take ages. It will have discussions like, why don't we have the right to buy 3 dresses because my parents had the right. So I think it's a fundamentally questionable question. Why should I care? Why should I care? Because for decades we have purposely misinformed the end consumer. And I think that's the fundamental problem. And we have, if you look where we are, we have the responsibility first to provide transparency. Now, of course, the challenge with environmental issues is you cannot just talk on one thing. CO2 might be at the moment the most pressing one, but there's microfiber, there's chemical, there's water, blah, blah, blah. Probably a range of about 20 factors you need to kind of condense to provide information.
Allow me a short introduction. Please keep the thread. But if I allowed you at the beginning of our conversation to comment everything.
I didn't want to.
So.
I didn't want to.
No, it's fine. That's why we're
right?
here.
No, go ahead. So I think it's very valid to like express yourself over your way of choosing your clothes, right? I think it will be very, very hard to take this choice from people, and I would say circular economy and focusing more on circular production conditions, make it much easier to choose between many different things you want to wear. For example, because circular economy is not only recycling, but also sharing. We have this huge trend with second-hand clothing. So why not go a step further and do like, not car sharing, but like, what is it called? Clothes sharing? I don't know another word in English. Why not do a library system with clothes, right? You have like huge stores. You could change some of those concepts.
Give me the chance to ask that at the end of our conversation where the future goes.
Yeah, okay.
I would
Marcus,
like to comment
just
on,
one comment,
yeah.
and then we come back to you.
Comment again on Rüdiger. So I think for many years, the goal of a brand has been to become the love brand, right? The brand of choice on top of mind of consumers. Because we all know from statistic and research that 75% of all brands are irrelevant, right? They are definitely irrelevant. And what has changed lately is that consumers want to see from their brand really progress when it comes to circularity, when it comes to sustainability and so on. We see the negative impact on social media platforms when a brand will do something which is not in their favor. They give them, shit. And that is, for me, a very important moment, the iPod moment, where brands started to realize, oh, holy shit. Is it late? Definitely, it is late. Is it too late? Maybe not. Right? So now they have to speed up and catch up with the progressive leaders, with those who started 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that is the only piece I would like to add.
Well,
So adding all that into your comment, please continue.
Just one thing. I mean, guys, let's not make us more shiny than we are. You look on the NASA website. That's why I said research for an hour and there you have all the information you need. Look on the NASA website, a state-owned or state-influenced organization of a country who until recently wanted to exit the climate agreement. Every month they publish the ppm level of climate gases in the atmosphere. It's at 417. In 400,000 years of human history, it was never above 300,000. You don't need an education, a PhD or whatever to understand we did this. So that's number one. Number two is, we know that our industry creates more impact than any other industry except the energy industry. And thirdly, we continue creating 23 billion pairs of shoes and 100 billion garments every month. Everything is pure cosmetics if we don't fundamentally change. And I have to say, while I'm a fan of circularity, there's a danger still of a boomerang effect, because if you don't leave traces by circulating clothing, you might actually justify fast fashion. But I think until we're there, fast fashion will have vanished anyway, because I agree with you, there needs to be a law of minimal standards. But while we need to be super dangerous, there's not a freaking single person who can throw the first stone. Not us, not any of the brands you might have been thinking. I think we cannot compliment ourselves on anything. The problem is much too big and the time is much too short. And here we just talk climate. We haven't talked on waste, we haven't talked on water and other things.
So seeing this, it's a real like complete holistic view. And as we only have some chances to focus on now, I would love to come to this moment where you said, what roles do influencers play? And it's not the definition that it's only social media influencers. It's also influencers like all of us. And if we have the chance now for another 15 minutes to have the right focus on where is it right now. Of course, you are controversial, that's why you're here, and this is just the starting point of all the discussions and controversial roundtables we're going to host. But seeing this as a lot of energy from all of you, seeing this as a lot of industry expertise and consumer understanding from all perspectives. What's the next step? What can we do? And if you want to refer to good brands, loved brands, or brands what your work is inspired by, please do so. Mm-hmm. If you want to share this website from NASA or whatever, and it's controversial if you say take an hour and then you are ready, because you said, where should I look at?
No, I didn't say that.
I'm over-exaggerating to span. So if there's something you can like fire out in the world where we are listened to right now, where is status quo of good examples and what is an inspiration worth? Can you share that? And I would start with you now because you were a little shorter on words. I don't know.
Which happens rarely, but
more aggressive.
for once.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let me share two. And I know one is acceptable and one is probably totally not acceptable. The acceptable one is we need to create holistic transparency about the problem. We need to have a freaking label on every garment and every pair of shoes with the complete impact, not a fraction of the impact, a complete impact. I know that's a huge challenge. I know we are working on this with the EU Commission to some part, and there's probably a social part in it and an ecological part. I don't think we can trade human factors with the ecological one, but that's my belief system. But at least on the ecological side, we urgently need a transparency, auditable transparency, and there are some fundamental problems, how to allocate CO2 to the sheep wool versus the meat, all kind of things to be sorted. But I think that's fundamental. We need to create transparency that at least the good-willing guys can make a choice. And then we can do influence in the other one. I think the other one is, which probably is socially completely unacceptable. We need to work on a new definition of freedom. Because when we have a limited amount of resources the planet can cope with, there's just no other way than to limit the consumption and distribute vouchers in an equitable way between all the participants. Yeah, you're looking at me, but that's what I mean. I knew it's not acceptable. But if the planet can cope with so many cows, that's it. Limit the freaking number of cows. Yeah. And funny enough, the generation of our parents have lived this after the war. Nobody did complain. Now we are complaining as if it's the highest level of freedom if we can consume as much meat as we want, buy as much clothing. Let's freaking limit it. Because if we look at the definition what freedom is, it is not the maximum of consumption. Yeah. And not the freedom of consumption. It's a freedom between an idea and a situation where I need to make a choice and the choice itself. And that's where consciousness starts. And we need a new discussion on freedom. It's completely unacceptable that we allocate a freedom discussion against a limitation of choices because we don't have one. And it's a complete undemocratic way, I know, at first sight, but I think what's much more undemocratic is that our generation can harm a planet where the generation that can need to live with the harm is not able to vote. Mm-hmm. So let's not talk about democracy here. There is no democracy. This needs to be a fundamental principle. There's so many resources available. At my birth time, it was 3.5 billion people. Now it's 7.5 billion people. So let's divide the available resources or the planet's capacity by the number of people and distribute it. And that's about it. So if you have a voucher between 3 clothings, I'm definitely sure you will take the right choice. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rüdiger. You can comment or share whatever is in your...
I think, that is also my personal mindset shift, which took place because for very long I wouldn't have agreed directly to that. But I agree that the whole situation requires radical rethinking of the entire approach, the entire process, and the new way of cooperation, collaboration. And that is, for me, coming from that industry, a large step, a huge step to get people really joined up, opening up their progress on certain developments, initiatives, and saying, come on, that is for the entire industry, for example, and that makes it a better place. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So that is something I would definitely see and encourage people to do, and I know that it's very difficult, and people might say now, Marcus is crazy now, but I think that is required in that situation. And the other piece I would like to add, and that is also new to me, is actually that we need to put rules and regulations in place, certain, right? To really limit the possibilities, what can be done and what can't be done anymore. And that has also changed with me personally, right? That is a journey I've been through, and it takes time. So I'm not there to say, okay, 100% regulation. It might be in between, right? Again, not black and white. I see something more in between. But these are the two things I would like to add to your question.
I think it's very, very interesting that you come with like vouchers and so on. I don't know if that's the final way, but I think, well, of course we need to limit somehow our call it consumption or production. We somehow need to limit our resource waste. First of all, we need to get rid of all fossil fuels, of course, but then we also kind of need to limit our resource waste in general. What I think is very important about the thing you've said is the freedom definition, because like the German Supreme Court also ruled that the generation now living has the responsibility to limit their own standards of living, so that the future generation, not only mine, but coming future generations, maybe my children, grandchildren, do have a livable like planet to live on, right? Because there's only freedom on a habitable planet. You can't live anywhere where the acres are like dry. You can't live anywhere where the forests are burning all the time. It's not freedom to live in a apocalyptic world. So yeah, I would definitely agree that we need to rethink our understanding of freedom, and well, maybe also of how much do we need to own at the same time, not to have access to. I think there's a difference between constant access and constant owning things that you don't use, right? A car, for example, stands in the garage or in the parking lot for like 23 hours a day. There's no real sense for everybody owning a car, or even two, because you have even more choice if you have like a huge public, maybe different public parking lots, where you can choose between the car you need in the moment, or even have the choice to say, well, I don't need a car for like a year or so, so I don't take one. So I think this is a huge thing we need to do in the next years.
This is a perfect bridge for me, because we're getting closer to the end of our first EDM expert talk. If you would have now an amount of sentences, whatever, with two perspectives. One would be, what would you put on a carta, if you could, for not long term, but short term? And what would you add, seeing future systems coming to life? So you added already some ideas of how you might be like a startup or as an influencer for various businesses, because you are, at the moment, as I see your life, you have lots of roles to play. So maybe you have some sentences, and of course for you as well, what would you put on a carta, short term, and what do you see in terms of future, where can we generate business?
So first of all, I would put on the carta that CO2 budget that we still have. So that's the most important thing. If we like, nothing really happens in the first place, if we like break through it in like 9 years, if we don't keep in like this budget, but the whole climate crisis will accelerate in like a what is it called, exponential way. So we've learned in the pandemic what exponential growth means. It's going to get worse and worse and worse, and then it's like apocalyptic ways, like hell. So this would be the first and most important thing. Every government, every industry would need to commit to fulfill these CO2 budget goals. So second of all, I would say in a very drastic and short-term way, we need to ban all fossil fuel subsidies and take a find a date where we ban all fossil fuels. We just need to have this pressure, because if we don't have a pressure of something not being allowed to be done anymore, there won't be the urge of alternatives. Not the urge of alternatives getting into systemic changes. So those are the two very short things I would change. And third of all, I would say we also need, in a bigger tent, have a new understanding of living together, because I think this also social media age, and I think also before that, because like consumption was a privileged thing to do. You wanted to do it. So owning this stuff was the way of showing your worth somehow. I think if we want to change the world as we need it, we need to come to the conclusion that my actions will have influence on your actions, and your actions will have influence on your actions. So, and even more on countries that are very dependent on us, and that we made dependent on us in the first place.
Thank you. You couldn't have brought it brilliant together. I saw you two or three speeches, and it's always a really red thread. Thank you so much for sharing.
I mean, for me, I would bring it more down to the industry, and I come from the collaborative approach and saying like, come on, guys, it is the time now where the leader or the change maker are becoming the big stake. They are getting together quickly. They are not talking about each other, but that they are talking with each other to think like, okay, what are the steps we need to do? Because that's, for me, taking out of all those discussions, and I know that they are very emotional, very critical, but we need to come into an action point, right? And we need to act and not talk. We talk for too long, and most of the time we talk about rather than with. And I think bringing the people around the table, and then, of course, on one hand side, I wanted to say hope for change leader, but not hope, expecting everyone to step up. For me, it's now easy to say it at the moment because I'm independent, right? I can do so. So I know how much CEOs and so on are in a hamster ring, you know, because they have much more than these KPIs and this and this and this. Nevertheless, that is the number one priority, getting around the table, taking the change leader with them, giving them a big stage and the saying, and then those change leaders should open up their books that, as I said earlier, that they really build new joint ventures together, corporations, and working together on developments with sustainable materials and so on. I think it is the time now, and it is the time to do so. And that is actually what I would like to say.
Thank you. I'm really sorry that we're running out of time. It's just the starting of the...
I still have 2 minutes.
You
right?
have still...
Two things to add, because some of the stuff you were saying, it triggered me. I think, number one, in the Charter, we clearly put partying ourselves is forbidden before we have solved the problem. Mm-hmm. Secondly, no stupid excuses.
Agreed.
Every CEO has 24 hours in the world. And there's some who do things differently, and they're in the same hamster wheel. Hamster wheel is not an excuse. So number one, no excuses. We're doing bad. And if the four of us would sit on an ESA space station in the orbit with a limited budget of oxygen, nobody would start a discussion how we can make a party or burn some of the oxygen because it's fun. So we need to take this thing serious. And I think the second thing I would put in the Charter, you said we need to ground it, and you're totally right. And I think collaboration is in the implementation needed, but not on the fundamentals. What in the fundamentals belong, I would actually lift it higher. One of the things I'm still missing is why your generation is not striking against the German retirement system and the retirement system in many other countries. Because if you look at the foundation, why you guys will pay for our freaking retirement, you can read it in the statutes in most of the countries, it is because we leave you the planet and your life in a much better condition than we had it. So I want to see everybody on the street and striking against the retirement system, because then it starts hurting. Mm-hmm. And then we have a fruitful discussion, and then we can talk on solutions. So I think we need to look at the entire social, you are totally right, at the social system, and there's a mental part we cannot enforce where we need a dialogue on what is actually freedom of choice versus freedom of will. But then there's also some fundamentals we cannot accept anymore. I don't see why next generation should pay for our retirement system if we leave such a mess.
I know that you are keen to answer, but we...
Well, I just wanted to say that we are not striking for our retirement because it's very far away and maybe not possible on a dead planet.
Against ours.
Yeah.
Paying the retirement.
pay for it.
And this is the thinking behind it is that it includes
absolutely.
CO2 and the traces we leave, etc. So I suggest we continue. We will have lots of moments and energies to accelerate this. Thank you very much. It's superficial. It feels right superficial now. We continue for 2 hours now. I hope our listeners and viewers feel good with the conversation starting point on our Sympathy Lab and EDM expert talks. It could only be a starting point because there's so much energy and also contradictive
We'll be
conversations. Sorry?
We'll be back.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Max. Thank you,
Thank you.
Marcus. Thank you, Rüdiger. Thank you to our listeners, and see you next time on Sympathy Lab with EDM Expert Talks.